The Kendal Train Crash, Jamaica's deadliest rail disaster. In 1957, Norman Manley was chief minister. Alfred Hitchcock's new thriller, Vertigo, had recently premiered at the Carib Cinema. And Radio Jamaica and Rediffusion filled the airwaves with programs such as Talent Parade and Alma Mok Yen's Tea Time. It was the final weekend of summer, and the parishioners of the Holy Name Society of St. Anne's Roman Catholic Church in Kingston, led by the Reverend Father Charles Eberly, were busy making preparations for an all-day excursion to Montego Bay. The trip had been widely publicized throughout the city, and hundreds had planned to make the journey. I was planning for it months ahead, and don't ask if I didn't spend money. I bought new everything because I wanted to go on the trip brand new. Kendal Crash survivor Dorrell Dobson, in an interview with The Star, September 5th, 1982. On Sunday morning, September 1st, 1957, the platform at the Kingston railway station was abuzz with would-be travellers eager to secure a coveted seat on the diesel-hauled train readying for departure. The trip to Montego Bay was a smooth one. Reverend Father Charles Eberly made his way through the coaches conducting Mass with his excited congregants. The return trip to Kingston, however, would never reach its destination. After a day of fun in the second city, weary travellers piled into the 12 wooden passenger coaches. The numbers had increased significantly. At 130 to 150 passengers in each coach, well over the train's capacity of 80 persons per car, the train bore the weight of 1,600 souls. Also on board were close to 100 known criminals, hooligans, and pickpockets. In all, the number of passengers totaled 1,600, an interesting feat, given that the limit for each of the 12 cars was 80. The criminals were said to have caused such a ruckus during the trip that a priest declared that the wrath of God had surely descended on them. Unknown to him, that statement was prophetic. At around 11:30 p.m. on the train's return leg, as the 2 diesel engines and dozen wooden cars neared the sleeping town of Kendal, Manchester, 3 shrill whistle blasts signaled the journey's abrupt and tragic end. Within minutes, the train had picked up speed and derailed. Barreling through the night at full speed over rough terrain, the rattling locomotive approached a bend in the rails near the town of Kendal, Manchester. At around 11:10 p.m., several hundred yards from the main road to Balaclava, 3 train whistle blasts signaled disaster. The driver had lost control of the train. I then shouted to the observer, Theophilus James, who was beside me, "We're dead now, we're dead now." I prepared myself for death and made 3 blasts of the whistle to warn those behind that something was wrong. Train conductor Garnish Lurch, in an article for the Daily Gleaner, Wednesday, September 3rd, 1957. The passenger cars came loose from the engine, and the derailed coaches toppled into the gully to the side of the tracks in a pile. "Mama, I can't feel my legs." The last words of a child, a girl no older than 7, reached the ears of her mother, but there was nothing the woman could do. Her own body was pinned beneath the wreckage, blood mixing with the dirt. The mother too was trapped, her body broken beyond recognition. They both cried out to each other, but the words were drowned by the groaning of the train, a twisted metallic death rattle. 2 of the coaches were reduced literally to matchwood, while others were gutted or had sides torn out. 1 coach, with everything but the floor torn away, remained on the rails and kept on running for about a quarter of a mile. The Star, September 2nd, 1957. Word travelled fast, and hundreds flocked to the scene, only to be greeted with the sight of corpse after corpse laid out on an embankment, looking, in the words of a survivor, like bundles of dirty clothes. The morning dawned on a grisly scene of bodies strewn across the countryside. Some had died on impact, while many were critically injured, impaled by the twisted metal and wooden fragments. There are many heart-wrenching accounts of survivors searching for their loved ones among the carnage, while looters brazenly stole the possessions of the dead and dying. The remaining coaches were an utter shambles, with dead and injured inside and underneath them, survivors screaming, calling for help, or crying the names of relatives or friends. The Daily Gleaner, September 3rd, 1957. Amid the wreckage, one survivor's story stood out, a girl who, by all accounts, should have perished with the others. Butelin Carvey, just 15 years old at the time, had been on the train returning from the all-day excursion with her younger brother Dennis. Their excitement turned to dread as the train derailed near Kendal. Carvey was knocked unconscious in the carnage and was counted among the dead. When she eventually regained consciousness long after, she was surrounded by the bodies of the dead, her own body among those identified for burial. Her father, Claremont Carvey, a firefighter, had already believed his daughter was among the deceased and had already gone back to Kingston to tell her mother of her fate and to prepare for her funeral. He had even directed the body handlers to leave her untouched, as they had identified her by the clothes she wore. Meanwhile, word spread, and her eldest sister, who had recently migrated to England, was given leave to return to Jamaica for the funeral. But as fate would have it, Butelin was not dead. After coming to her senses, she searched desperately for her brother, Dennis, and with the help of 2 good Samaritans, eventually found him hospitalized with a head injury. Despite the odds, Butelin returned home, a walking miracle, to a family reeling from the belief that they had lost her. Her mother, overwhelmed with relief, washed away the dirt and blood from her daughter's body, as if cleansing her from the nightmare that had nearly taken her. A true miracle from a night of terror. Some survivors, however, reported that many of the hooligans had ridden on the platforms and steps, and some had tampered with that angle cock while en route to Montego Bay. Others indicated they had seen the wheel in question tightened in Montego Bay. While neither of these accounts could be confirmed, some things were known for sure. The train was overcrowded, a true recipe for disaster. Hospitals at Spalding's and May Pen were filled to overflowing as medical staff made appeals for volunteers and blood donations from the public. At Mandeville, all the bodies were laid out on a grassy knoll behind the hospital, where lights were strung on wires from a couple of large trees to a small wooden building serving as an office and shelter. There, anxious relatives filed by all night, trying to identify someone dear to them. The Daily Gleaner, Wednesday, September 3rd, 1957. The Kendal Train Crash left 187 dead and 700 injured. Many were later buried in a mass grave near the crash site. The Friday of that week, September 8th, 1957, was observed as a national day of mourning as world leaders sent messages of condolence and sympathy to the Jamaican people. Through the ensuing Railway Commission of Inquiry, the cause of the crash was discovered to be the closure of an angled wheel brake cock. It was suggested the brakes had been tampered with. The inquiry found many deficiencies in the Jamaica Government Railway and asserted that the trains had been kept in poor condition. The report submitted could not have been more blunt. Mr. Magnus, the acting general manager, has shown by his conduct in procuring a false brake certificate that he lacks the integrity which one must expect of an officer occupying that position. Yet despite the findings of the inquiry, research shows that it was the overcrowding of the coaches that played the greatest role in the extent of the carnage. Additional coaches had been added to accommodate the large numbers of passengers to whom the church had sold tickets. There were too many people aboard the train. Confidence in the rail service was shaken, and much looting and robbing of the dead and injured occurred after the crash. After the disaster at Kendal, all wooden coaches were replaced with sturdier metal ones. Still, public confidence in rail transport took a sharp decline. The Kendal Train Crash was a national disaster that touched the lives of thousands of Jamaicans. The story of what happened at Kendal must never be forgotten, and has since gone down in history as Jamaica's deadliest railway disaster and the second worst rail disaster in the world at the time.